Welcome back to the Wolf of Property Casualty. I'm your host, Derek Lasniak, with over 15 years of commercial broking experience focused on the middle market, upper middle market, and national account space. The Wolf of P&C is a practitioner-led podcast made for brokers, buyers, and insurance carriers. No bullshit, not selling anything each and every episode. Quick rant here today, something that I've been thinking about, and it's carrier relations. How to maximize the relationship between your insurance carrier and the customer. For you buyers out there, for brokers out there, and carriers, I think this is a great episode for you. And there's really two types of carrier engagement that goes on with customers. The first one is the tactical and traditional insurance carrier. And this is where I think most brokers stop. And this is the things that you have to do when you're placing insurance. They include things like a loss control visit. They maybe has an underwriter that sits in on the loss control visit. Very tactical, very question and answer style, very colonoscopy, like all those things. And also another one is a claim review. Perhaps if you're doing your job really well, brokers out there, you have claims adjusters that make an on-site visit once a year to discuss the claims. These are very tactical. These are very forced. These are very on alert and inspection. And when you look at all the tactical engagement that an insurance carrier is going to have with a customer, and for me as a broker, I wanted to control, and I've talked about this on this show a lot, I wanted to control that narrative. I felt as though, and I think this is a good feel for brokers out there, I wanted to control the narrative because what happens in those meetings is a reflection on my preparation. If an insurance carrier shows up for a loss control meeting and the first question that they have to a CFO who's really busy, who's bookended by a risk manager and an HR person, and says, "Tell me about what you guys do here," that's going to make me feel like an idiot. It's embarrassing if you have a customer to suggest that the insurance carrier is not prepped for that interview and that you think so little of the customer's time that you're going to let a question like, "What do you do here?" slide. So I was always trying to control these necessary but tactical meetings. Loss control visits for brokers out there and buyers out there, my guess is that if you're like me, it was uncomfortable because you never know what they're going to find. I held the loss control representative from the insurance carriers right up there with OSHA. They're there to inspect. They're not looking. I've never read a loss control report that has a page worth of things that my client does really well. That's not what they're there to do. It always has what? 2 or 3 risk recommendations. It's not followed by 5 things that are stellar. It's not how they read. And so the natural human tendency is to say, I want less carrier involvement. I want less insurance carriers touching my client, because any kind of interaction runs the risk of something going wrong, rates going up, a risk recommendation that we can't afford to do. It is really important to control those meetings, but you have to do them. If you're operating in the insurance ecosystem, you have to do them. Don't let those meetings, brokers and buyers out there, don't let those necessary meetings as part of the underwriting and the client management process deter you from all things carrier. Let me tell you about another angle that should be done separate from those meetings. One of the things that I prided myself on when I was an acting professional is I was careful, and I still believed in the boogeyman, and I was still skeptical of all those meetings, which made me hyper vigilant in my preparation for those meetings. But I also told my clients that almost mandatorily, I'm going to tear down the wall between you and the carrier on a relationship level. I'm going to tear down that wall. And some of my clients, because they were a little bit like me, they wanted the least amount of interaction with their carrier as they could. They didn't want something to go wrong. They didn't want them to find something that otherwise wouldn't be there. They didn't necessarily have the mindset that I want to be better. They didn't want the headaches. But I would always tell them, whether they were open to it or not, part of me as a broker is going to tear down that wall. And the same way that I curate those other meetings to make sure nothing is unexpected, I'm going to curate these, and you're going to have to trust me that these are important. And so what I'm talking about is the relationship, the personal level. Brokers out there, if you think that there's not a person behind underwriting, then you don't really understand insurance. Yes, there's models. Yes, there's rates. Yes, there's appetites. But underwriting insurance is still a relationship business. Heck, all of insurance is still a relationship business. And so while you're dealing with the tactical meetings you have to do, how are you teeing up the personal meetings? So I've got 2 or 3 things that I recommend for buyers and brokers to make sure that, especially on accounts in that middle market space, make sure that you're enhancing the relationship between your insurance carrier and the customer. What that means is I would always set up at least once a year or at a minimum every other year. I want to have a meal, preferably dinner. This might not be super popular for the work-life balance, but there's a certain setting that a dinner suggests. And I would always do dinner early to be respectful, but I want to have a dinner between the buyer, my underwriter, and here's the important piece, the appropriate level up from the underwriter. Typically in insurance carriers, that's going to be a regional leadership person, someone who's in charge of the whole state for that middle market practice group, or the national account person. And I want to produce a setting at a nice restaurant. I'm going to ask the insurance carrier, provided the account's big enough, to pay for it. And I want it to be intimate. I'm not trying to invite 10 people to dinner. I'm trying to have me, the buyer, maybe one other person from the buyer, the underwriter, because you don't want to alienate your underwriter and go above their head and then have them freaked out that they weren't invited. So you have your primary underwriter, and then typically someone either twice above them. And I'm not talking underwriting manager. I'm talking a regional vice president. All these insurance carriers have hierarchies that look like this. And you want to have 4 or 5, 6 people at this dinner. This doesn't mean we're going through the facility. We're not looking and inspecting for things that could be wrong. We're getting to know each other on a personal level. It gives the buyer an opportunity to talk about the business at a macro level, something that is far more comfortable for them than talking about insurance and property recs. It allows them to get to know, hey, you have kids, we have kids. It allows most of my buyers to cut down the walls and say, we really enjoy and thank you for this relationship. There's a couple things that aren't going well. You're breaking bread and you're having really honest and open conversations. Why do you expect your customers, broker, to have that level of relationship and you try so hard to achieve it on golf courses? Why do you expect them to have it with you, but you don't want to set up your client to have it with the insurance carrier? These things can manifest themselves into better renewals. When you have a really big claim, complex accounts sometimes have big claims. Complex claims are messy. Coverage isn't always specific or explicit. Sometimes you have parts that are covered or uncovered. Building that relationship at a level with a significant amount of authority, that regional vice president or beyond, is healthy. Do you really want to be marketing $1 million accounts every single year? This is part of the formula to make sure you don't have to. This is how you get over bumpy components in relationships. This is how the 50-50 ball goes your way of the customer, brokers. These things are important. And I wouldn't say that my former employer struggled with this, but I know from talking with other brokers out there that there is not so much a gate up on the customer side to having these engagements, but your agency maybe puts a gate up. If you're working at a firm where, hey, Derek, here's your underwriter. Feel free to have as many happy hours and as many whatever you want with the underwriter. Beyond that, though, I'm your boss and that's a me thing. Don't let your agency leadership shut down access to leadership beyond the underwriter. And if they are, ask them why. You don't need your boss to be there at this dinner. I never did. You don't need them to own that relationship for whatever reason. That relationship is paramount and crucial to the success of your customer, which is a large customer. And I'll be honest, those persons, those regional vice presidents, they are desperate to get in front of customers. Most brokers don't do this. And every time that I did one of these dinners or I did a high-end lunch or something along these lines, the representation from the insurance carrier said, this is incredible. I don't get to do this enough. I don't get to learn about my customers. I don't get to know the faces behind the checks that get cut. And don't let the gatekeeper inside your agency stop you from doing that, because they're worried that that relationship is somehow the value that they bring to the agency table. Or if they get to know you, maybe they'll invite you to some boondoggle at some golf course in California. You have every right, and unless you're told that you don't, to use those relationships, not to just piddle paddle around, but in the effort to build a relationship with your key customers where the carrier needs a seat at the table. In my career, especially among my top 10 clients, most of my clients were bought into this. Most of them didn't want to do it, and some of them were apprehensive to doing it and felt like burdened by it. And I would tell them flat out, this is part of the gig. You got to do it. Nobody wants to do this, but you have to do it. And I need you to turn it on. Here's the things I need you to talk about. I need you to talk about the new product launch. I need you to talk about expansion in 5 years. And they're not as bad as I make them out to be. I mean, people are nice. People generally like to meet new people, but this is part of the gig. And most brokers, I think a lot of brokers, aren't taking advantage of this. They're not breaking down the wall between insurance carrier and customer in a personal setting, in a non-tactical setting. This was part of my secret sauce to longevity in relationships, better renewals, and most importantly, when you have bumps in the road, whether they're claim driven, coverage driven, price driven, having that relationship established at a level above underwriting where there is a lot more control and authority will never serve you wrong. It'll get you through some of the rocky times and it'll make the good times even stronger.